My first name is Desh and my last name is Urs. I live in the eastern part of the United States in the state of Florida. This journey began a long time ago. It began about 30 years ago or so when I began to understand the value of computing and such. And then I was always very curious about, fundamental mathematics and very curious about the use of data. I was sort of always intrigued to understand how is data going to be used in the enterprise. And at that point in time, it was not about data-driven decisions and things of that nature. It was just trying to understand the use of data. And then I began to understand, how you can, combine data elements to really make it into useful information. And there's a big difference of trying to understand between, the information piece and the data piece, right? And as that journey began, I began to understand things such as, data mining and those kinds of applications and tools and that science. And then as business intelligence began to come at the forefront, I led that charge with some of the early developments and early products that were built in the industry. And that interest continued to grow. And as that interest continued to grow, it became more and more important to me to sort of, speak a little more openly about the conversation that we need to pay a lot more attention to data. We tend to move to the right very quickly on the analysis, but we really need to pay attention to that data. And so that has been a fun journey so far. But if you think of what's going on today, pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? So pre-COVID, we were all happily working in our offices. There was a lot of emphasis put on, securing the network from an endpoint security, trying to secure what was in the office within the parameters, the barriers of the office enterprise, right? Some of us had the privilege of working from home, et cetera, even at that point in time, or remotely logging into a system. But the challenges were different. I mean, there was ransomware, there were breaches and things like that, right? As soon as COVID hit and all of us started working from home, most people don't just sort of pay attention to their routers, et cetera. And you think about how weak passwords can, allow people to infiltrate into your systems right from your router, right? And so the conversations have changed very, very rapidly. And so the discussion one has to ask oneself is that how do you secure your first connect point, right? If there's any such term, how do you connect into your network? How do you secure that? But that reliance is on the person that is working from home, right? So you need to make sure that your passwords are strong. You need to make sure that your connectivity is good enough for you to work. And then you begin to start rolling it up the next mile, right? You start looking at it and saying that, okay, am I coming in through a VPN system? How am I coming into my system? Do I leave my system unattended while I go have lunch? And then my kid hops onto my laptop. And then all of a sudden, I've opened myself to every breach possible, right? So simple measures that we were taught when we were, when we came to these professions is lock your computer, don't leave your computer, open for anybody to come and use. Those are becoming very, very important conversations today, right? And then you think about how do we actually access the enterprise network, right? That is a different discussion. And that discussion lies with the IT organization of enterprise and CISOs and things like that. But as a user, it is incumbent upon me to understand that I'm the weakest link in the chain, right? If I don't understand that, we are just going to cause ourselves a lot more aggravation over time. When I started my company, iBridge, 16 years ago, right? I mean, the world was a simple world. People talked about the cloud, but nobody understood what the cloud was, right? The customers didn't, our customers are sort of an interesting batch of defense departments and different agencies that we work with in the US and also, in different geographies that we operate in. And as cloud became more and more prominent in conversations, and if you think about what's happened in the United States, the Department of Defense has moved, heavily into the cloud and things like that, right? People began to accept the cloud a lot more. But I really believe when we look at where the industry is going and where technology is going, we have an innovation team within the company, and they have been constantly talking to us about the influence of 5G and edge computing. And I really believe that it's going to change the way that we compute in general, right? The speed by which we are able to compute, the speed we're able to generate and test our algorithms, right? And generate information that we can begin to rely on. I would hope that the people, especially in the Data Sciences Foundation, people that are already thinking of the future, they would look at these technologies and say, how do we incorporate them into our life, right? I mean, there is a conversation to be had there, right? So that is something that I would definitely have people look at. And also then you think about the changes that are going on in the way that we are managing information within the cloud. Okay, I mean, there's so much information today that we have to manage. And that part of it is also going to get better and better over time. Data, not all data is the same and all data is good, right? I mean, we need to begin to understand that you have to question the data. You really have to question the source of where the data came from, right? You got to understand what was the purpose of the data that was collected, how it was collected, what is the lineage of the data. There's just so many questions that you have to ask about the data before you integrate that data into anything that you're doing, right? So, for people that grew up in the database world, et cetera, right? Data hygiene, data organization, data management, those are very, very core and really valuable assets today that if you're able to build on those skills, then you begin to look at it and say that, okay, I understand the source of the data, right? I understand how this data came into my systems, how old this data is, et cetera. And then you begin to understand that you begin to poke that data. One of the things that I always tell people, there is a lot of noise in data. And so you got to begin to poke that data to try and understand it and say that, okay, where are those segments of data that I really need to focus my time on? So it goes back to the fundamental piece that I have always sort of, talked about and preached and, sort of made sure that people understand that before you begin to analyze the information, understand the source of the information, the purpose of that information. And if you're able to get there, then you're going to ask yourself the next series of questions, right? What steps do I take, to integrate this data into my system? Is this data, for example, skewed? Is there bias in this data? How do I eliminate the bias in that information, right? There's so many examples of data scientists where they begin to look at that somebody, when they were collecting the data, for example, just simple things like demographics and age, right? Either it was not properly coded in, people took liberties with demographics, right? And then imagine that you are a pharma company involved in drug discovery, and now you have integrated lab reports that are not properly demographically segmented. How that skews your patterns, right? And those kinds of questions. So isolation of data and the bias of data is very, very important at very early stages. There was a time when boards were constantly talking to the execs and saying, we need to understand this data sciences business. Everybody's talking about data science, right? And so there was a big push to bring in data scientists into the organization, which also meant that the people that came into data sciences came in there not because they had the love for data sciences. They looked at it as a career opportunity to make more money. And that is a problem. That's a huge problem, right? If you come to data sciences because you love it, right? It's a different discussion. And companies are now, if you look at the number of projects that have not matured or projects that have failed, people are now looking at it saying that, I need to approach this conversation very differently, especially at the C-level suite, right? Because they're beginning to realize that data science, like any other science, has its own limitations, right? If you don't talk to your people about failure, what has failed in the past, right? And you don't learn from that immediate history, you're going to commit the same sets of mistakes. So my input to the team and the data sciences team and everybody that practices this art is to look at yourself very carefully and be truthful. I mean, to really be truthful, because what is capable and what is not capable. Because if you raise the expectations to a point where you can't deliver, you're damning the whole profession. And that is a question that one has to ask. So let's be true to ourselves, right? I would speak to the audience that is considering signing up, right? Or haven't committed to signing up. I think I would ask you to think about your role in your company and how you can guide either your organization, right? And so if you think of the number of people and the kinds of people that are here speaking to you and participating, they have a lot of experience in this area. They're not out there to sell you something. They're out there to help you understand this complex science, right, which is data sciences. And if you're sitting on the fence thinking, should I participate or not, what could be better than sitting in your home and not traveling and participating? How easy has it become today that we can just, sign on and we are there? And I think it's just going to be a phenomenal event. I mean, if you just look at the faculty that is participating, the speakers that are there. I came from the world of large computing environments, high performance computing, big systems. And I can tell you, it's just fascinating to see the number of people with quantum mechanics, quantum physics backgrounds, right, that are part of these panels that are speaking. It's going to be a phenomenal event, and I would encourage everybody to participate and contribute to this conversation, right? We are actually involved in not only the learning part of it, right? I mean, that's a big part of our business, right? We like to learn. We have an adage in the company where we say, we listen, we learn, we execute, right? So it is this listening and learning part that my company is deeply involved in at the event. But we're also running a global survey. So, we started in this journey when COVID hit, and we're running a global benchmarking survey of understanding productivity and risk. And we have a very interesting product called Metolis. It's actually a platform in the cloud. It's a SaaS platform. We are deploying this platform during this time of the Data Sciences Foundation conference. And we are collecting a lot of information about how people are thinking about going back to work as optimism is growing. And there's cautious optimism, right? And companies are looking at bringing back employees into the enterprise and trying to bring people back in. And so there's a massive challenge, right? Because I've been functioning great from home. I really don't want to go back into the office because I'm not sure what the environment is. I have parents that live in, we have a multi-generation household. I have parents, I have young kids. And so those challenges and the liabilities on the corporate side, right? If something were to go wrong, and the risk to business. So iBridge is actually taking an active role in collecting that all that information through a survey platform called Metolis that I described. And as we get those results, I will be interpreting those results and sharing those results with the community at some point in time when I'm speaking.